All right, Subcommittee on Research and Technology will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the subcommittee at any time. Welcome to today's hearing entitled From Risk to Resilience, Reauthorizing the Earthquake and Windstorm Hazards Reductions Programs. I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Good afternoon, and thank you to our expert panel of witnesses for coming to take the time to be with us here today. I look forward to hearing about how the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program and the National Earthquake Hazard Reduction Program have helped us respond to natural hazards and mitigate their effects. Earthquakes, tornadoes, and hurricanes destroy property and take huge toll on families, communities, and businesses. Billions are spent each year on recovery efforts, and the costs associated with natural hazards are only expected to increase. That is why we need cost-effective measures to reduce the fallout of natural disasters. All 50 states endure windstorm hazards, including tornadoes, tropical storms, hurricanes, and thunderstorms. These storms and their associated flooding are the most destructive and costly natural hazards in the United States. My home state of Georgia is no stranger to severe weather, which frequently damages homes, businesses, and cropland. Butts County, Georgia, where I live, suffered severe windstorms last January, which killed a child and caused $15 million worth of damage across the area. But of course, severe weather poses a challenge throughout most of the country. Between 2010 and 2020, communities across America endured 6,000 tornadoes, which cost an average of $2.5 million in property damage per storm. Just as every state is affected by windstorms, they are vulnerable to earthquakes. Nearly 75% of the United States faces some risk from earthquakes. While rare in Georgia, has been prone to small earthquakes over the years, and as a result of fault lines that run through our state. While we are unable to predict when earthquakes may occur, by analyzing past quakes, scientists can better assess the likelihood of future earthquakes. That's where NIHRP comes in. NWIRP or NWIRP and NIHRP, those are going to get interesting, were created to improve our understanding of natural hazards and their impacts, and to encourage the implementation of strategies that reduce the damage from natural disasters. And we know that research pays off. The National Institute of Building Science estimates that for every $1 invested in mitigation strategies, $11 is saved. Both NWIRP and NIHRP help coordinate research efforts between the government, academia, and private sector. This collaboration is needed to meet the challenge of responding to severe weather events. Additionally, NWIRP and NIHRP both conduct research and development to update building codes, voluntary standards, and construction practices to improve the resiliency of structures. I would like to thank our witnesses for being here, and I look forward to hearing from them about these vital programs and how they are protecting Americans from future weather events and saving taxpayers and private sector money. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentlewoman from Michigan, for an opening statement.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman Collins, and thank you to our distinguished panelists for today's hearing examining two very important programs in our country's preparedness for natural hazards. As the chairman said, the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program, or NWIRP, and the National Earthquake Hazard Reduction Program, NIHRP. And we have this reality in the country that no territory is untouched by natural hazards, be it tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, flooding, wildfires, and more. And we've seen over and over the destruction that these types of natural disasters can cause. And as the chairman indicated, in his district, he had a weather event, and not far from mine, just within the last year, we had 100-mile-per-hour high-speed winds in Ingham County, Ingham and Livingston, which is just right outside of Oakland County, where I represent. It killed two people and cost $75 million in damages. So The hazards are inevitable, but disasters are not. And we've got to continue to push with our hazards research, awareness, and preparedness, not only to save lives, which is critical, and protect property and recover quickly, but to really establish the best standards in the world for safety and preparedness. And so everyone here knows that this is an all hands on deck kind of problem. And we need to understand the science behind these hazards, particularly for earthquakes that have oftentimes remained somewhat mysterious from the preparedness angle. I was an appointee in the Obama administration about 13 years ago when we had an earthquake hit Washington, D.C., not knowing that it was an earthquake at the time. And so we got to think about our building structures, our community resiliency, and people preparedness. Just as we prepare for the future, this trend is only going to continue, right? And in some ways, it's only going to accelerate. We've got awareness of our fault lines here in the United States of America, and we have also, on this committee and in the subcommittee, evaluated the increase in tornado and windstorm events in areas that traditionally haven't had those, so we don't have the warning systems available, which is why it's been so important for us to work with other Department of Commerce partners like NOAA, in addition to our friends at NIST. And so while these earthquakes and windstorms compel two different types of research and response programs, we can look at the structure for how we go about it. And we have a lot of pride in the grounding of scientific research and fact and the principles that guide the programmatic work of NIHRP, particularly since 1977. This has just truly been a great model for interagency collaboration and updating building codes, protecting people, and agency work and functional recovery gets communities back up and running faster after an earthquake and certainly saves lives. Congress created NWRP in just 2004 to build off of NIHRP's successful model. And although the authorizations for NWRP expired in 2017, something we've discussed on this committee, the program agencies have continued their important work in windstorm resilience and improved forecasting and better safety measures like safe rooms for tornadoes and hurricanes is absolutely saving lives. And it's also, frankly, the cost factor. And we're recognizing ballooning costs from these hazardous events. And the National Institute of Building Sciences found that for every dollar invested in natural hazard mitigation through retrofitting existing structures, we save an average of $4 in future disaster costs. So infrastructure, standards, right? Investing in resilient communities and hazards research is not only saving lives, it's very fiscally responsible. So we've got some nice trajectory here. And I'll submit the rest of my testimony to the record, but thank you, Mr. Chair, for today's amazing hearing and look forward to hearing from our witnesses. I'll yield back.
All right. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Lofgren, for an opening statement.
I snuck it on you.
The chair is going to recognize the chairman of the full committee.
Full committee chairman always keeps an eye on the subcommittee chairman, I promise you. Thank you,
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
the last hearing I'll chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oklahoma saw 74 tornadoes last year. My home community in Roger Mills County was significantly impacted by the February 26th tornado. Yes, February 26th of last year that ripped through several counties in the state. 5 houses in my community were deemed a total loss. Several state and local facilities were significantly damaged. It even took the life of one of my high school classmates. So you could say I have a particular interest in the life-saving work being done through the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Lofgren for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Collins and Ranking Member Stevens for today's hearing, and welcome also to our distinguished panel of witnesses. You know, all the members of this committee represent areas that have been affected by natural disasters, some fueled in part by our changing climate. Many Americans have suffered personal losses from severe storms and flooding. Over the last few years, changing atmospheric phenomena have led to a series of devastating storms throughout my home state of California that have resulted in flooding, power outages, mudslides. I know this happened in my district last year when massive flooding caused the Pajaro River's levee to fail, forcing 1,500 people to evacuate and flooding homes and businesses. The climate crisis continues to put massive strains on aging infrastructures and already vulnerable communities across the country. Now, I grew up in California, and all of us who grew up there or live there are very aware of the threat of earthquakes. I vividly recall the Loma Prieta earthquake that shook San Jose in 1989. And anyone who's been through an earthquake, even those not as large as Loma Prieta, can easily recall what they were doing, the exact moment it hit, and how they reacted. Since the National Earthquake Hazards Reduction Program was established in '77, the program has achieved great progress, substantially decreasing loss of life and injuries and improving the capabilities of seismic risk assessment. Thinking back to Loma Prieta, we had a big section of freeway simply collapse. The Bay Bridge collapsed. We need to harden our infrastructure. I also want to focus today on the science of predicting earthquakes. We don't currently have the capability to predict the exact time, location, and magnitude of an earthquake, but we should continue the research. Even a few additional minutes of warning could mean the difference between life and death. We've seen this already with Shake Alert, the earthquake early warning system, which can give a few seconds warning before a strong shaking is felt. This could make a difference in operating rooms, from transportation systems. It's really important. Even a small amount of time does help. The Bay Area Rapid Transit System partners with USGS to automatically stop trains when a shake is detected, and we have to continue to look for scientific and technological solutions to give people as much time as possible to prepare. Programs like these, which focus on wind and wind-driven storm surge and the earthquake, with its focus on earthquakes, are really important to our understanding of the science of hazards and translating that understanding into more resilient communities. I've long supported these programs, and I look forward to hearing from the panel today about how we can continue them and maybe even improve them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
All right. Next, we'll introduce our witnesses. Our first witness today is Mr. Jason Averill, who is the Deputy Director of the Engineering Laboratory at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Our next witness is Mr. Edward Latch, who is the Director of the Safety, Planning, and Building Science Division at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Next, we have Dr. Gavin Hayes, who is the Earthquake Hazards Program Coordinator at the United States Geological Survey. And our final witness is Dr. Susan Margulies, who is the Assistant Director for Engineering at the National Science Foundation. With that, I now recognize Mr. Averill for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you very much, Chairman Lucas, Chairman Collins, Ranking Member Stevens, Ranking Member Lofgren, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Jason Averill, Deputy Director of the Engineering Laboratory at the Department of Commerce's National Institute of Standards and Technology. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss NIST's role in the National Earthquake Hazard Reduction Program and the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program. NIST has two important roles in each program: a leadership and convening responsibility, and an applied research role aimed at reducing loss of life and property from earthquakes and windstorms. Both programs align well within the larger mission of NIST, which is to promote U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness by advancing measurement science, standards, and technology in ways that enhance economic security and improve quality of life. In fulfilling our lead agency responsibilities, NIST is guided by the strategic plan that we've published for each program. For additional details, I will refer you to my written testimony. This afternoon, I'd like to discuss 3 ongoing programs that I think highlight the positive outcomes that NEHRP and NWRP can deliver. The first is functional recovery. NIST and FEMA collaborated closely to produce a landmark report entitled Recommended Options for Improving the Built Environment for Post-Earthquake Reoccupancy and Functional Recovery Time. The term functional recovery recognizes that we expect our built environment not just to provide life safety, but to return to its intended function within a reasonable period of time. Following the release of the report, the Building Seismic Safety Council has established a functional recovery task committee comprised of dozens of leading experts in the earthquake and building code community, and we anticipate meaningful changes to building codes and standards that will mean significant improvements to recovery time for communities facing seismic hazards. Next, tornado provisions. In 2011, an EF5 tornado devastated Joplin, Missouri. NIST conducted a comprehensive technical investigation resulting in an important report in 2014. NIST identified at the time that tornadoes were not considered as a load for building design in any codes or standards. In partnership with our NWRP agencies and many stakeholders, we identified 2 major missing elements. First, maps that accurately characterize where tornadoes are a significant hazard, and second, ways to design buildings to resist tornadoes. Once developed, those 2 elements were adopted by the American Society of Civil Engineers and then incorporated by reference in the International Building Code, marking the first time that U.S. critical buildings in tornado-prone regions will resist tornado loads. Finally, I'd like to highlight the important role that NWRP plays in the NIST investigation of the impacts of Hurricane Maria on Puerto Rico in 2017. While the National Construction Safety Team Act authorizes NIST to investigate how the storm impacted buildings, how emergency communication systems worked, and the patterns of mortality and morbidity, the NWRP authorities were critical in fully scoping the NIST investigation. We utilize NWRP authorities to study the performance of critical infrastructure, including power, water, and transportation, the recovery of social functions, and the recovery of small and medium-sized enterprises and supply chains, including manufacturing, retail, and the service sectors. The additional projects provided important context to fully understand the performance of buildings and the subsequent injuries and deaths from Hurricane Maria. NIST has a long history of improving the quality of life and economic competitiveness of U.S. communities subject to hazards, including windstorms and earthquakes. In leading the federal efforts through NEHRP and NWRP, NIST is proud to be regarded, as it has for more than a century, to be a trusted party facilitating collaboration among industry, academia, and government agencies to meet critical national needs. We greatly appreciate the efforts of the members of these committees and other members of Congress to support federal agency leadership in the wind and earthquake communities that keep the nation resilient, economically competitive, and secure, and contributing to our quality of life. I'll be pleased to answer any questions you may have today.
All right, thank you. I now recognize Mr. Latch for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Collins, Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Stevens, and Ranking Member Lofgren, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Edward Lotch. I am the Director of Planning, Safety, and Building Science in the Risk Analysis Planning and Information Directorate at FEMA. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss FEMA's supporting role within the NEHRP program and the NWRP program. FEMA's mission is helping people before, during, and after disasters. FEMA is not just a response and recovery agency. We also work to mitigate the worst impacts of disasters before they occur. Strengthening the security and resilience of the nation against earthquakes and extreme wind events is a vital aspect of this responsibility. Earthquakes and windstorms can have devastating impacts. The Puerto Rico earthquake sequence, which included a magnitude 6.4 quake in 2020, resulted in a large population being displaced from their homes and an estimated $3.1 billion in economic losses. In 2021, deadly tornadoes swept through the western Kentucky area. According to a joint analysis by the USGS and FEMA, earthquakes cost an estimated $14.7 billion in annual average losses in building damage and associated losses, while NOAA reports that severe storms and tropical cyclones have cost an estimated $41.7 billion annually in the United States over the last 40 years. The objective of NEHRP and NWRP is to achieve major measurable reductions in the losses of life and property from earthquakes and windstorms, respectively. According to FEMA's 2020 Building Code SAVE study, the adoption of building codes and standards, which are informed by NEHRP recommendations, have resulted in millions in total losses avoided annually. Meanwhile, NWRP has played an important role in mitigating the number of fatalities and total disaster damage caused by tropical storms and severe weather via the creation of effective mitigation techniques and the promotion of preparedness and mitigation measures. FEMA's supporting role within NEHRP includes the translation of results of research and applied science and problem-focused studies into guidance, training, and support services. Our supporting role within NWRP includes development of risk assessment tools and windstorm-related data collection and analysis. One of FEMA's primary contributions to both programs is the improvement and promotion of better building and retrofit practices through technical guidance, training, support, and participation in the development of model building codes and standards, both before and after disasters. The development and enforcement of up-to-date codes is among the most effective strategies available for natural hazard risk reduction, while also being one of the most cost-effective ways to safeguard our communities. As was mentioned earlier, notably, every federal dollar invested results in more than $11 in savings and reduced damage by helping communities recover more quickly. In addition, FEMA's work with our federal partners, the agency also supports other organizations and initiatives that bring people together to reduce earthquakes and windstorm risks. FEMA earthquake mitigation and preparedness activities, such as the National Earthquake Technical Assistance Program, provide training and support for the world's largest annual earthquake drill, the Great American Shakeout, and these are all examples of these activities. FEMA also promotes the goals of NEHRP and NWRP by providing grant funding for eligible products through our hazard mitigation assistance grants and other FEMA grant programs. I want to specifically thank Congress both for its bipartisan support to the Building Resilience Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC, program's development in 2018, as well as its continued investment in the program. In October 2023, President Biden announced an additional $1 billion in FY23 funding for the BRIC program. This investment will protect lives, result in less complex disaster recoveries, and can help us break the cycle of disaster, damage, reconstruction, and repeated damage. While FEMA will always be ready to respond when disasters occur, we recognize that true success rests in mitigating the worst impacts of disasters before they happen, reducing both loss of life and economic disruption. These mitigation efforts are particularly important for underserved communities that are most vulnerable to the impacts of natural hazards. As we look forward to the challenges ahead, FEMA looks forward to working with both our NEHRP and NWRP partners and the members of this committee to build a more resilient nation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Latch. Now recognize Dr. Hayes for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Collins, Ranking Member Stevens, Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Lofgren, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee today on the National Earthquake Hazards Reduction Program and the associated functions of the U.S. Geological Survey. The USGS is the science arm of the Department of the Interior, and NEHRP is one of our responsibilities. NEHRP exists to reduce the losses associated with earthquake hazards in recognition that although earthquakes are inevitable, their consequences for people and the built environment are not. Efforts to mitigate those effects help to improve the lives of Americans exposed to this nationwide hazard. Under NEHRP and in collaboration with partners, the USGS is responsible for monitoring and reporting on significant earthquakes and their potential impacts, developing hazard assessment maps and associated products, and conducting research necessary to improve our understanding of earthquake hazards and our ability to assess earthquake risk, monitor seismic activity, and generate accurate earthquake forecasts. At the end of 2023, the USGS updated the National Seismic Hazard Model, producing the first ever 50-state model This model demonstrates that earthquakes represent one of our nation's most significant and costly natural hazards. 37 US states and all US territories have experienced an earthquake exceeding magnitude 5 over the past 2 centuries, and 50% of states have a significant potential for future damaging shaking. The USGS periodically releases updates to the National Seismic Hazard Model timed to coincide with development of the next generation of building codes, a process that involves close coordination between the USGS, NIHRP partners at FEMA, and a variety of other groups. The NSHM is the basis for seismic provisions in building codes that underpin domestic construction efforts estimated to cost close to $2 trillion per year. Building a society that is earthquake ready requires critical information. A second major USGS responsibility under NIHRP is domestic earthquake monitoring and reporting through the Advanced National Seismic System, which involves partnership between the USGS and university and state-operated regional seismic networks. The USGS also leads global earthquake monitoring and reporting through the operation and maintenance of the Global Seismographic Network in partnership with the National Science Foundation. Recent expansion of these seismic networks has been driven by the development of an earthquake early warning capability in California, Oregon, and Washington called Shake Alert. Shake Alert is managed by the USGS and, again, operated in partnership with West Coast states and academic institutions. Shake Alert has issued public alerts across each of these 3 states since 2021 and is scheduled to complete build-out by the end of 2025. USGS earthquake monitoring and hazard assessment activities depend upon a robust program of targeted research. This research improves our understanding of earthquakes, our development of the National Seismic Hazard Model, and our capability to develop information products that provide situational awareness and support risk mitigation. Internal research efforts are complemented by an external grants program that provides funding to university, state, and non-government partners and allows the USGS to leverage the wealth of knowledge on earthquake processes in the broader community. We also learn about earthquakes by investigating their effects when they occur. The Earthquake Hazards Reduction Act calls for the investigation of significant domestic and international earthquakes to learn lessons that can be applied to reduce future earthquake losses in the United States. USGS leads the coordination of post-earthquake investigations on behalf of NIHRP agencies and our partners through the Plan to Coordinate NIHRP Post-Earthquake Investigations. This plan is in the process of being updated, and NIHRP implemented elements of the revised plan following the devastating earthquakes in southern Turkey a year ago. The USGS and its partners in NIHRP continue to support research, technology development, and outreach to improve our nation's resilience against earthquakes. We work closely with partners around the world to advance our science, and we are grateful for the many decades of support Congress has provided for this work. We do not know where or when the next large damaging earthquake will occur, but thanks to NIHRP, we can make use of improved information and data that helps to mitigate the impacts of such events. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee has.
All right, thank you. I now recognize Dr. Margulies for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Collins, Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Stevens, and Ranking Member Lofgren, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Susan Margulies, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Engineering Directorate at the U.S. National Science Foundation. It's a privilege to be here today to discuss the important roles that the NSF plays in understanding, mitigating, and building community resilience to natural disasters, including the activities supported through NIHRP and NWRP alongside our federal partners. For decades, NSF has been investing in fundamental research and innovation to improve community and infrastructure resilience to natural hazards, including wildland fires, flooding, drought, landslides, earthquakes, and windstorms. NSF-funded researchers continue to play a critical role in advancing our understanding of these hazards to improve prediction, risk assessment, and resilience. NSF invests in research across all fields of STEM and all levels of STEM education. We have a broad mission and an agile approach to investing in research and innovation. It enables us to catalyze cross-discipline collaborations as well as partnerships with communities, the private sector, and others, bringing critical resources and research to bear on the societal challenges related to natural hazards. This work in natural hazards has long been part of our mission at NSF and was further emphasized with the enactment of the CHIPS and Science Act. NSF leverages an array of funding mechanisms and cutting-edge infrastructure in support of these national priorities. Our standing programs across NSF receive and fund many innovative, investigator-driven proposals relevant to natural hazards, including earthquakes and windstorms. NSF also invests in critical research infrastructure. The NSF Natural Hazards Engineering Research Infrastructure, or NERI, is a distributed multi-user network and a prime example of the infrastructure that NSF supports to advance NEHRP and NWERP goals. As one example, the recently upgraded NERI shake table at the University of California, San Diego, is now the largest shake table test facility in the U.S. and possesses the biggest payload capacity in the world, able to test life-size structures undergoing real-world quake conditions. Another example is the Wall of Wind at Florida International University, which enables researchers to test new strategies and to reduce the economic impact of hurricane-speed winds on our civil infrastructure. These and other NERI facilities allow researchers to investigate the effects of a wide range of natural hazards and their combinations, and to test groundbreaking approaches that will inform building codes and protect individuals, communities, and critical infrastructure. As natural disasters unfold, it's critical to record and preserve information that would otherwise be lost and impossible to recreate. Through its rapid award mechanism, NSF can quickly fund researchers who deploy and collect data in the aftermath after earthquakes and windstorms, including the 2020 magnitude 6.4 earthquake sequence in Puerto Rico, the 2020 Easter Sunday tornado outbreak in the southeast, the 2020 derecho in the Midwest, as well as Hurricane Ian in 2022. A good example of how we use this data following the 2018 Hurricane Michael in Florida, an NSF Rapid team was supported by a Rapid Award, and they investigated the wind performance of elevated housing, and the results of which have already been incorporated into the American Society of Civil Engineers wind load standards that now inform our current building codes. NSF is proud to work closely with our federal partners in support of NEHRP and NWERP. Just this month, NSF and NIST announced a second cohort of disaster resilience research grants, a collaborative effort that attracts hundreds of proposals. We also partner with other agencies in research infrastructure. The Global Seismographic Network has been an NSF USGS partnership for decades. NSF investments will continue to provide essential value in our shared efforts to better understand, mitigate, and build community resilience to natural disasters. NSF appreciates Congress's continued support for the agency's mission and its important contributions to NEHRP and NWERP and the natural hazards research more broadly. We look forward to continuing to work with the committee and with our partner agencies on these important priorities. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm happy to answer your questions.
All right, thank you, and I thank the witnesses for their testimony. The chair will now recognize himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Latch, in your testimony, you share that for every dollar invested in building code adoption, communities save $11 in cost related to natural disasters. You also say that communities that have adopted modern building codes are already saving an estimated $1.6 billion a year, with a projected savings of $132 billion through 2040. Can you highlight some other examples of how your research translates into practical applications that help save lives and taxpayers' dollars?
Thank you for that great question, sir. And yes, in addition to the items in the testimony, there are some other areas along similar hazards lines that we think are great examples of how mitigation activities will save long-term damage. One of them is in the space of tornado shelters or storm shelters. The NWERP agencies have worked together to advance storm shelter criteria over the last several decades and have developed criteria that provide life safety protection from high winds such as hurricanes and tornadoes. FEMA, through its grant programs, has invested over $1 billion in community and residential safe room programs over the last several decades, and it's led to any number of lives saved in critical areas, particularly tornado-prone areas. Likewise, FEMA and NIST have conducted post-hurricane and post-tornado investigations on the existing storm shelters to determine what improvements can be made and how to interpret those or how to translate those into the nation's standards, whether it's design standards or whether it's the nation's model building codes.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Let me get this walked over here. Mr. Averill, I own a trucking company, and I know how storms and tornadoes and earthquakes can do damages to our highways and our roads and pretty much all of our infrastructure. To what extent has NWIRP or NEHRP incorporated transportation infrastructure into their hazard resilience plans?
Thank you. Yes. As I mentioned earlier, this notion of functional recovery really is a new concept for our building codes and voluntary consensus standards processes. And one of the big things that I think that really recognizes is the importance of all of our critical infrastructure, transportation included. If you have a hospital, for example, and the ambulance can't make it, or the staff can't get to the hospital, it's difficult for it to perform its critical healthcare function. We do research that looks at how to improve our critical infrastructure's performance when subject to both chronic as well as long-term acute hazards. So a good example of that is following the Anchorage earthquake in Alaska. We sent a team up there to look at damages. One of the findings there was to look at the performance of fiber-reinforced polymer systems. These are oftentimes used to reinforce concrete structures such as bridges and others needing reinforcing. But the question is, how do those weather and perform as a function of time? And we have an active research program now to put fiber-reinforced polymer systems out in the real world, measure how their performance degrades as a function of time.
Yeah. You know, I always think back, it probably hadn't been 5 years ago when Atlanta was virtually shut down from a quick snowstorm, where people were just stranded on all the interstates and virtually couldn't move for days. And do you engage with the U.S. DOT or the state DOTs?
We do. All of our NWIRP and NEHRP working group level meetings are open to other agencies, and we've engaged with a number of agencies not named in the program as appropriate. Our concrete research program at NIST has worked specifically with DOT, most notably the Federal Highway Authority, and state DOTs to look at how to strengthen the performance of concrete as a function of time.
Yeah, okay, thank you. With that, I yield back, and I now recognize Ms. Stevens.
Well, thank you. So as I mentioned in opening remarks, in 2011, the 5.8 magnitude earthquake from Central Virginia was historic for two reasons. First, it cracked the Washington Monument, unfortunately, and second, it was felt much more widely than seismologists would have previously predicted, challenging our geological understanding at the time. The risks posed by quakes are directly tied to the geological formations under our feet, and that changes whether I'm in Michigan or if I'm in Washington, D.C. And that's why we're just so pleased to see that USGS released an updated national seismic hazard model, the NSHM, last year for all 50 states. The cutting edge data is just critical in fully understanding the risks posed by earthquakes to our entire nation, including areas in the eastern United States, which have a higher population density, older building stock, and increased likelihood of amplified shaking, of which I experienced in the U.S. Department of Commerce that fateful day in 2011. So Dr. Hayes, how is the USGS facilitating the dissemination of this latest data to partners in the NEHRP and outside to better prepare our country for the unique risks.
Thank you for the question. We just released the National Seismic Hazard Model in December, and we've since then undergone a campaign to advertise the NSHM and the changes that underlie the model that has been released. We will be actively working with our partners at FEMA to undergo a process to introduce the NSHM in the future to building code updates that again underpin the construction around the nation and allow the translation of that science into practice through those policy changes. We will continue through our active community engagement with taking our NSHM to communities to help them understand the changes that are brought through that National Seismic Hazard.
Well, count me in for a roundtable in Metro Detroit, and I will cajole my colleagues to do the same, and maybe I'll join them, because we really, I mean, look, we lived through this pandemic. You know, it's always the things you're not really thinking about. We got access to the information on this one. We really salute you, and you know, maybe others have some things to chime in here on that front, but I did want to get Dr. Margulis in about how the NSF is ensuring the data collected by the seismic station network is available to non-NEHRP partners and affiliated researchers, particularly because the NSF and the USGS operate, you know, hundreds of seismic stations as part of several seismic networks, including the global seismogeographic network, and the GSN also includes internationally operated seismic stations as well.
So this seismic data, as well as geodetic data as part of the gauge system, as well as that data that I discussed in terms of the rapid award, that very ephemeral data that's gathered right after a natural disaster, as well as data from our extreme event response networks, or EERs, and we have a number of those across the country. That data is all in a design-safe facility. It's a data depot. It also has a cyber infrastructure component for data security. It is publicly available data, not just to researchers around across the nation, but also to businesses across the nation as well, and other agencies.
Tweetable for a member of Congress, or?
Well,
we're not going that far.
I think an important aspect of this is access to the computational infrastructure that's so sorely needed, as well as data visualization. So data that's stored is not data until you can give it life. Right. Through models, through visualization, and through others knowing that it's there.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, and you know, we really want to continue to keep you all on speed dial, because it's also this awareness chain of command as well, and you know, who briefs, and how do we get alert, and how do we make sure we're prepared. So count me in too. I'd love to spend some more time with you in that data space. And with that, Mr. Chair, we'll yield back.
The chair now recognizes Chairman Lucas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anyone in Oklahoma can tell you that tornado shelters are a life-saving tool that not enough Oklahomans have access to. Dr. Margulis, what research and development efforts are needed to develop low-cost tornado shelters that can benefit communities literally in the countryside too?
Well, I grew up and spent nearly half of my life in Minnesota, so we have a bonding there. At the National Science Foundation, we fund unsolicited, no calls for it. Most of our funding goes to unsolicited research across the spectrum, from fundamental science and engineering to translation to a particular use. In this case, a design of a new shelter would definitely come to the engineering directorate, and those would be supported eagerly. It would have incredible societal impact.
And along with that, what role can research universities and land-grant use universities with their statewide extension networks play in these efforts?
So we welcome and encourage the proposals from every institution And we have a mandate in CHIPS and Science to broaden the participation and funding to our EPSCoR states at the National Science Foundation. We have many initiatives that bring in land-grant institutions, of course, but also two-year and technical colleges as well, to really fund the great work as well as educational initiatives that the National Science Foundation invests in.
Mr. Latch, you touched on some of these issues in your earlier comments. Could you expand on that too?
Thank you for the question, Sarah. And I would add that for several decades, FEMA and its partners have been at the forefront of developing what we believe are relatively cost-effective and near absolute protection storm shelters, initially for individuals and then later for communities. We have seen in places like Oklahoma where there have been circulating grant programs that have been extremely helpful to get people on board with it. And yes, there were real costs involved, but if folks can find a way to cover the mortgage part of a $3,000 to $5,000 additional fee, they can turn an existing room, whether that's a dressing room or an interior bathroom or whatever else it might be, into a safe room. And lately and recently, we've seen a lot more work of communities choosing to develop community safe rooms in schools and other critical facilities.
Continuing with you, for communities like my home county of Roger Mills, even a 45-second increase in lead time can be the difference between life and death. Could you shed some light on how FEMA is working with other agencies to bolster our understanding of tornadoes and increase those lead times?
I do know that the work we've been doing, and we work with collaboratively, whether it's our partners at NIST or other federal agencies inside and outside this program space. We have developed guidance and tools. We have done education and awareness work with the public and private sector. We have nonprofit and other partners who we work with who help us spread the message about how do you make folks aware of what the risks are that they face and how can you drive action.
Absolutely. Absolutely. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The chair now recognizes Ranking Member Lofgren for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hayes, I think, the earthquake prediction mission has been described as the holy grail of seismology. Can you update us? Where are we? What progress has been made? Where do we think we're going to end up in that and what time frame?
Thank you for the question. As you pointed out in your opening statement, earthquake prediction is currently not possible, but the USGS does lead a National Earthquake Prediction Evaluation Council that is happy to evaluate any credible earthquake predictions and prediction or forecasting techniques. We distinguish earthquake prediction from earthquake forecasting. Earthquake forecasting are our approaches to estimate the chances, the probability of future earthquakes and where they occur.
Important, but I'm more into the question is about giving people a little bit of advance warning for the real event.
So as we continue in our research investment into forecasting, we're hoping to be able to shrink the amount of time scales of those forecasts and continue to invest in approaches to change forecasting into prediction evaluation in the future.
Quick question there, as I understand it, 12 technical partners who have license to operate agreements with Shake Alert. What sectors are covered and what sectors aren't covered and should be?
There are several sectors covered by those license to operate, the LTOs, as part of Shake Alert. Transportation, there are those in the medical sector, and I'd be happy to follow up with more details of what sectors exactly are covered in any future detail.
That would be very, very helpful. I appreciate that, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Dr. Baird for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the witnesses for being here today. I always learn something from these sessions, and I appreciate that. But, Mr. Averill, National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, is the lead agency for the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program, and as such, your agency is charged with promoting the implementation of windstorm reduction measures. This past year, West Central Indiana suffered from at least a dozen tornadoes and occluding storm systems. Schools, businesses, farms, churches, and homes were severely damaged, if not destroyed. These storms destroy communities. So, Mr. Averill, your National Advisory Committee on Windstorm Impact Reduction assessed there is, and I quote, a general opposition to any and all strengthening of regulations and standards. So my question is this statement based on any concrete data, or why can't we let each state decide what is best for their communities?
Thank you. That's an excellent question, and I will point out that the NACWIR, the Advisory Committee for the NWIR program, was sunset 2 years after the authorization. So I might suggest that while that statement was accurate at the time, particularly noting following the Joplin tornado, that there were no provisions in the building codes that dealt directly with tornadoes. I do think the fact that we now, in the 2024 version of the International Building Code, have our first tornado-resistant provisions for building codes shows that that thought process has evolved, and I do think it is entirely possible. As my colleague from FEMA mentioned, there has been good and active work in the storm shelter area. There's a standard ICC 500 that's been developed that is a resource for people that want to provide storm shelters locally, as well as additional provisions for schools and other certain types of construction to provide community shelters. So I think that is moving in the right direction in terms of finding cost-effective measures. At NIST, we work with, we're a non-regulatory agency in the Department of Commerce. We bring our science into a consensus standards process, making sure that what is discussed and proposed has a strong grounding in science, but it is a consensus process. And ultimately, it is up to the local states and local jurisdictions to adopt the provisions of the building code model that ICC puts forward.
Thank you for that. My next question goes to all the witnesses, and I must remind us all that I got about a minute and a half left, so if you can be brief. But what role do you see emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and quantum computing playing in enhancing the resilience and preparedness strategies for communities vulnerable to natural hazards? How can federal policy support and integrate the deployment of these technologies to effectively mitigate the impacts of natural hazards? Mr. Averill, start with you.
Thank you. That's an excellent question, and I think artificial intelligence and quantum technology have immeasurable promise to make real progress in these areas. I know there's national initiatives that are underway to put some infrastructure to that, including at NIST, and I think the opportunities for application to that technology to advance our mitigation measures in both the NWRP and the NEHRP space are quite significant.
Thank you. We've got about 40 seconds left, so each one of the last three of you have about 10 of that.
Thank you, sir. Two areas. One, in FEMA, in the future, the agency will use AI and technology to improve the response and recovery effectiveness, and we will also assess damage more effectively afterwards using AI and other electronic means.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll just say that at the USGS, we're already incorporating machine learning and AI into our earthquake monitoring approaches to improve the ways that we locate and characterize earthquakes.
At NSF, we've already invested in 3 artificial intelligence institutes in Oklahoma, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania to improve our prediction and bring in heterogeneous data to be able to decrease loss.
Thank you very much. I'm very proud of you. We're on time, and I learned a lot. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Baird, and you know how we run a tight ship around this place too, don't you? The chair now recognizes Ms. Bonamici for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you to the chair and ranking member. Thank you to the witnesses for your expertise. So I represent Northwest Oregon. So the question there is not if we will have an earthquake, it is when we will have an earthquake along the Cascadia subduction zone. And Dr. Margulies, I noticed in your testimony you said, and I quote, subduction zones where one tectonic plate slides beneath another produce some of the most devastating earthquakes on the planet. So needless to say, there are many efforts in the region to educate people about the risks presented by earthquake. Thank you, Shake Alert. We are following and very much appreciate the Shake Alert work. And I'm really grateful that my Tsunami Warning Education and Research Reauthorization Act passed out of committee. It's estimated people will have somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes to escape into a safe space outside of a tsunami inundation zone, which is not very much time, needless to say. So we have some meaningful steps that we're doing. The strengthening, of course, the Geological Surveys Earthquake Hazards Program, a lot of things that we're doing, but we know we need to do more. So these investments in these early warning systems save lives, protect critical lifeline infrastructure, including utility lines, telecommunication systems, transportation systems, that are essential before, during, and after a major disaster. As we were just reminded in Oregon during a very brutal storm, just mid-January, with a combination of ice and strong winds that knocked over massive trees, caused loss of several lives. At least 6 people died, and then there's been tremendous property damage. And many Oregonians were without power for days, and without Wi-Fi, which was very frustrating to people, but without power is dangerous. Mr. Latch, there are some small coastal cities, for example, Cannon Beach, Astoria. So they deal with the challenges of limited resources as small rural communities, but also a population that tends to approximately quadruple during tourism season. So if there's an earthquake, these cities have the added responsibility of communicating about risk and response to a visiting population. So we need a policy that considers the unique challenges these communities face with lifeline services that will keep both resident and tourist populations safe. So how does current federal policy support the development of these lifeline telecommunications, utility, transportation? Where could investments make the greatest difference, especially in meeting the needs of small rural communities?
Thank you very much for that question. From our perspective, from FEMA's point of view, we operate and rely on, when it comes to earthquake risks, the National Earthquake Strategy. We will be publishing this year a new document, a framework to establish lifelines, infrastructure system recovery objectives for seismic resilience. Apologize for the long title, but that is a foray back into the lifeline space. We have, in past years, done additional work in the lifeline space through the American Lifelines Alliance, but that was back during the turn of the last century, and we think that there's a need to revisit lifelines as an important and underserved technology in an area.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Dr. Margulies, last fall, Oregon State University was awarded $15 million by the NSF to establish the Cascadia Region Earthquake Science Center, Crescent, as you're aware, a multi-institution earthquake research center collecting seismic data and research. I'll note that previous studies indicate we could see an earthquake as large as 9.0 magnitude, which the estimate is by the work group approximately 10,000 deaths, 30,000 injured, and $70 billion in economic damage. So how can we integrate the data forecasting and the recommendations developed by Crescent into the planning and information disseminated by the appropriate emergency response agencies?
Thanks for this opportunity to respond. The Crescent includes a partnerships committee, and they will be meeting in late June to really talk about where researchers will be interacting with local and tribal government officials, and as well as utility representatives, engineers, teachers, and other community members to really find what their needs are and establish that bilateral communication. This is about really accelerating the science to practice aspect of what the National Science Foundation is so proud of.
Thank you. That communication is so key. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to note that you know, the at-risk communities that we represent really appreciate the work that you're doing. And we know that we need these systems to work correctly. Lives are at stake. So, Mr. Chairman, as I yield back, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record a very thorough report by the National Institute of Building Sciences that highlights the importance of lifeline infrastructure to support community resilience and recovery after an earthquake. And with that, I yield back.
All right, so ordered. The chair now recognizes Mr. Kane of New Jersey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us today. Today's discussion is particularly important, focusing on the role these programs play in mitigating risks and bolstering American resilience factors that resonate strongly with my home state of New Jersey, where effective emergency response measures are vital in the face of evolving natural disasters that continue to extend further and further to the northeast. Mr. Averill and Mr. Latch, mitigation techniques exist to save lives and reduce damages, but it's widely known that communities are leaving highly cost-effective mitigation practices on the table. Could the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program and the National Earthquake Hazards Reduction Program help decrease the cost of mitigation measures even more to make a difference, or is increasing education and outreach to property owners to ramp up the adoption of techniques the most effective way to do things?
Thank you. Great question. So NIST is part of the Department of Commerce, and as such, our mission includes both life safety, but also U.S. economic competitiveness. So we engage in the consensus development of both codes and standards, and we supplement our scientific research oftentimes with economic studies. And those economic studies look at the benefit costs of proposals to make changes to ensure that those are actually supportable and implementable at the local level. And we think that's a real value add to the consensus process.
Thank you for the question, sir. I would add that in our agency, FEMA provides incentives and support for communities to adopt current building codes wherever possible, both through the codes and standards and by providing technical assistance to implement proven strategies and best practices. Our role, as we like to call ourselves, the translation arm from research to practice. Under the BRIC FY23 funding opportunity, building code adoption enforcement efforts are eligible as set-asides and activities under state and tribal set-asides. And we spend a great deal of time working on awareness, advocacy, and partnership building to bring building code knowledge and awareness to states, locals, and the public.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Margulies, as a geographic area historically impacted by windstorms shifts eastward, how is NSF supporting research activities to understand and address the novel challenges that arise with communicating risk to communities that lack the necessary infrastructure and resources, such as tornado shelters, to improve public safety during these events?
If I might, I'm going to answer the previous question as well from a social and economic sciences aspect, which the NSF also supports. Yeah. There's an award in New Jersey to Rutgers University, which really is exploring ways to incentivize communities to actually manage their coastal hazards. And they're using 20 years of tax and local state budgets, as well as the tax records and phone calls, to really understand what will it take to incentivize communities to actually adopt those practices to mitigate economic harm. So to answer your questions about how we communicate, in our funding includes in it a mandate to disseminate the findings as broadly as possible. So by passively disseminating findings, our agency, as well as other communities of research, are expecting those dissemination of findings. We also fund many research conferences where they come together to discuss a particular topic. That's another way of disseminating. And most of our centers include, and these are large investments, a mandate to reach out to communities about the research findings and to bring them in early so that the research that's being conducted is one that's relevant to the research communities that will be impacted and hopefully improved by the research findings.
And then for whomever is most appropriate to answer this, thank you for that. In 2018, the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program released a strategic plan developed with stakeholders from across government, academia, and the private sector to support research aimed at improving the understanding of windstorms and their impacts. Could you provide some examples of how NIST, NOAA, FEMA, and NSF work with academia and the private sector to address windstorm resiliency? Whomever's the best.
Sure, I can give a quick example, and it was mentioned earlier. We have the partnership between NIST and NSF and the Disaster Resilience Research Grants Program, and it's an opportunity. We get hundreds of applications through that, and it is great because it goes from the fundamental research that NSF does through to some of the applied research, and it's an opportunity to engage in both the wind space as well as the earthquake space.
Thank you. My time is expired, but if I may, through the chair, ask if anyone on the panel can send through the chair to my office examples to that question. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Kane. The chair now recognizes Ms. Salinas for 5 minutes.
Thank you to the chair and ranking member for holding today's hearing, and to our witnesses for providing your expertise. So I'm going to build on what my colleague from just the south of me in Oregon has already stated. You know, it is a very timely discussion that we're all here today. Many Oregonians are still dealing with the aftermath of the ice and windstorms we just saw that really ravaged our state, and certainly in my district. At the same time, Oregonians have long been bracing for a potentially catastrophic earthquake and tsunami. Again, as my colleague mentioned, the research programs that we're discussing here are critically important for preparing to and responding to these events. So my first question is, Dr. Margulies, I was grateful for NSF's award of the $15 million last year to support Crescent. And it's critical, however, that we're able to effectively translate research findings from the lab to local policymakers. How does NSF actually bring together geoscience with the social and behavioral sciences to help policymakers consider the human element to disaster messaging, preparedness, and response?
I'll take that and answer it from within NSF. So we have 8 directorates, science-based directorates at NSF, and we have working groups that cross across all the National Science Foundation to bring our directorates together. So when we think about Climate Change Coordination Committee, when we think about wildland fires, when we think of these topics, are topics that bring us all together on the urgent societal problems that face our nation. And so we coordinate within NSF. So we come up with and hold then meetings and conferences to bring in the words of others. We participate actively in interagency committees. We also then make sure that a solicitation for proposals on a particular topic are circulated within NSF, and all the program directors that might be interested in this then add their input and then often engage. So the communication within our agency is the real way that we engage the broader community, because when they see that such a conference is actually sponsored by multiple directorates, the communities that those directorates serve are automatically feel like members and welcome to those discussions and those opportunities.
Thank you. That's a lot of work and coordination. Mr. Lash, as you noted, modern building codes can go a long way towards saving lives and protecting critical infrastructure in the event of a major earthquake. However, these decisions are made at the state and local level, and many structures, especially in Oregon, were built long before seismic standards were in place. Oregon still has thousands of structures built with unreinforced masonry, putting them at especially high risk of collapse during a catastrophic earthquake. Does FEMA have sufficient resources to effectively work with communities to implement modern building standards?
Thank you very much for that question. FEMA uses its programs and its assistance and its research activities and its applied research activities broadly and generally to maximize or advance building code effectiveness wherever and however we can, whether that's working through partners. We do a lot of leveraging with public and private sector partners. We rely on other agencies and other elected officials and states and locals in pretty much everything we do. So our approach has always been to maximize our resources to advance codes the best we can. For instance, we track code adoption nationally through the International Services Organization, or ISO. And we have other activities that allow us to track overall progress or rates of adoption and enforcement, and we use awareness and guidance development, other tools to educate the public and make best use of our resources.
Thank you. How could Congress better incentivize state and local governments to implement modern standards and retrofit older structures?
Some of that is happening through programs like the BRIC grants program, where they have, this year and in the current NOFO, have set aside funding for states and territories, a certain amount for each state and territory to use on targeted building codes activities. There is also an effort underway through the Mitigation Federal Liaison Group to advance what's called the National Initiative to Advance Building Codes. It's being led through the MIDFLAG and directed and supported by the White House offices of CEQ and CPO, whose purpose is to use a currently published best practice to get agencies and agency programs and policies to use current building codes in their programs and policies.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Seeing no other members, I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The record will remain open for 10 days for additional comments and written questions from members. This hearing is adjourned.